Welcome to The Bottom Line, where we break down some of the main business and economic stories of the day. Today, we welcome you from the Warsaw Stock Exchange, where we are attending the European Capital Markets Forum. Today, I am joined by Niels Brab, the president of the Federation of European Securities Exchanges. Hello, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I first wanted to provide some context for our viewers, and I wanted to ask you if you could just briefly break down what capital markets actually are.
Absolutely. I think today we come together at the Warsaw Stock Exchange because, of course, the future of the capital markets in Europe is a key theme that drives the economic engine of Europe, and with that also the prosperity of people on the street. And that's why it's really a conversation that everybody should get engaged in. If you look at geopolitical realities and take a step back on how the world has profoundly changed over the last couple of years, then clearly this has been having knock-on effects on the economic realities and also how capital markets generally operate, right? So I think at the end of the day, if you look at the key proxies, the European Union in itself is not growing as fast as the United States. And we clearly see also decoupling from the BRICS conversation and some of the Asian realities. So within this, right, I think what you do see in Europe is that the monetary policy is not available as an instrument as it used to be in the last couple of years, and neither do we see that the fiscal realities are very strong at the moment. And that in turn really means that the private capital is a key solution to driving growth, competitiveness, innovation, creating jobs, but also making sure that people actually participate in the prosperity that we jointly create.
A quote that I wanted to hear your thoughts on. The European Union is sitting on 33.5 trillion euro, or more than double its collective GDP. But this money is stuck in banks because households prefer cash over market investment. How does Europe get out of this rut? Or actually, how did Europe get into this rut?
Yeah, I think it's a key number that I really like to use a lot. I think, if you look at the performance of the capital markets before we sort of get to the 33 trillion question, only 10% of all companies globally that actually go public, that go to list on an exchange, do so in Europe. 90% choose America and Asian countries. So that means also in turn that a lot of the opportunities that are being created through the growth, through the competitiveness, and through the jobs also are missed out on in Europe. Now, should we be extremely bearish because of this? I don't think so. I think that underperformance also means that we have a lot of room to grow, and that's exactly where the 33 trillion come in. In fact, we actually have a lot of capital. So it's not as if we wouldn't have an ingredient to sort of find a solution. The core question will, of course, in future be on how do you mobilize it? And clearly, when you look at the Savings and Investments Union planning by the European Commission and some of the other European institutions, then the reflection on what I like to call the demand side bucket is very central. And that concerns, on the one hand side, of course, the conversation on pensions. And do we have a viable pension system where people are actually a part of the capital markets union? But it also relates to the new ideas on creating savings and investment products, or rather creating the account structure around it, to make sure that people can also privately start to mobilize their capital, which in turn, by the way, doesn't only in a democratic way lead to the fact that people can participate, but it also means that we actually invest into our economy and make sure that we boost the growth, and with that give a positive spiral effect to fiscal and monetary policy.
I want to bring the US into this conversation. Obviously, it goes without saying that the US is miles ahead when it comes to capital markets development. Would you consider the US a role model for Europe?
Absolutely. I think the US has a lot of realities in their capital markets where Europe can learn from. It starts with the market structure very clearly, just to give you an idea on the fragmentation that we've been driving over the last 20 years through regulation in Europe. If you look at the trading landscape, we have more than 500 trading and execution venues in Europe, so the liquidity picture is extremely fragmented. In the US, that number sits at around 100, even though their market is significantly higher. So we probably run at 10 times the fragmentation level, and that, of course, in turn leads to a lot of inefficiency. But surely the US also has other aspects in their capital markets ecosystem which makes it so unique, and that is the attractiveness to list in the US, and that clearly also relates back to some of the listing realities, where now the European Union has made a lot of progress with the EU Listing Act, which has just recently been agreed. So there is more we can do from a supply side, essentially to match the needs in the market. When it comes to multiple vote share structures and other elements. But that's why I think profoundly, the US remains a role model. And that also brings us back to the 33 trillion. The US has, of course, with the 401k approach on the pensions front, I think a very smart system that engages people, also makes sure that they actually use their capital to invest.
And what are the key barriers for Europe when it comes to mobilizing capital markets, and realistically, how quickly can they be overcome?
Well, I think that the EU is now, of course, very eagerly working on creating a new roadmap. And it starts really with the relabeling of what we've been referring to as a capital markets union for a long, long time into a savings and investments union. I'm personally a big fan of that relabeling. Why? Because despite some 20 years of efforts around the capital markets union, the effects in the markets have been only very small. And I think a key reason for this has, of course, been that a lot of people on the street, and that's also why it's good to have a conversation like we have today, they couldn't really identify themselves with a project. And that's why I think, putting savings and investments, putting the citizens, putting the people on the street into the center of the reflections, that's also the people that currently park 33 trillion in bank depository accounts. That's going to be a key ingredient to making progress. How fast will we achieve this? I think that member states are increasingly aware of the economic challenges, so I think everybody is trying to get together to be faster on the decision-making process, because clearly when you look at the governance structure of the European Union, we are a bit disadvantaged because it typically takes us more time to make decisions compared to the US.
Fragmentation is one of the key problems. Finance Minister Andrzej Domański spoke about this in his keynote speech. Can you tell us a little bit more about what fragmentation is and how this can be overcome?
Yeah, so if you go back to the pre-MiFID I world in, say, 2005 and before, the EU market structure was basically not as fragmented as we would look at it today. The reason for this is basically that with the MiFID, MiFIR frameworks, we have injected a lot of regulatory competition, which has brought a lot of alternatives execution venues into the game. That concretely means that we have about 35-40% of lit trading, transparent trading ongoing today when we look at equity markets, about 60-65%. It always depends on the specific market in the European Union and the specific instrument we look at, that happen in the dark. Why is this a problem at all? I think on the one hand side, you should always remember that primary markets and secondary markets are two sides of the same coin. So that means if we want to have a strong listing universe in Europe, if we want companies to choose the European Union as a business location, if we want them to bring the innovation, the growth and the jobs to us, then clearly we should make sure that the primary markets have a very strong liquidity pool, because that ultimately ties back to valuation questions. The other element is really on the secondary markets front, where a high level of dark trading has extremely detrimental effects. That's also empirically proven. There's a lot of literature, academic literature, studies on this, and that's where I think the balance got a bit out of control. And surely the EU now, as part of the future planning on the Savings and Investments Union, should reflect on what is the right perspective and vision on the market structure moving ahead.
And just as we wrap up, I wanted to ask you about AI. Obviously, there's so much focus on that, investments, competition that is cropping up. Do you think that this could be a new burst of energy for developing capital markets, getting countries to get their act together?
I think technology is generally a driving force for strong capital markets, and at Deutsche Börse Group we take great pride in having been the inventor of electronic trading back in the 90s. Technology is in particular vital because it drives two key pillars in capital markets, and that is efficiency and the stability. Now, moving ahead, I think topics like cloud, DLT, AI will definitely continue to shape the future of the system. And that's also why I think for Europe it will be very important to be very clear on the necessity to have a strong digital ecosystem that sort of works in tandem with other reforms we do on capital markets. Parts of this, I think we have managed with the MiCA framework, DLT pilot framework, which sit more on the DLT and crypto side. There's probably a bigger conversation now unfolding on AI, the usage of it, the different use cases, but also how supervisors are working with the companies that actually want to make use of it in order to sort of enter the next generation. And clearly, we must stay ahead of the curve here, and that links partially also back to other elements in the ecosystem. Take the CBDC discussion. Clearly, the ECB is far ahead of the curve compared to other central banks, and we should definitely make sure that we are not being overtaken.
Niels Brab, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And we were joined by Niels Brab, President of the Federation of European Securities Exchanges. And that brings us to the end of the bottom line here from the Warsaw Stock Exchange. Make sure you join us every weekday for Business Arena and the bottom line. And for more news and features, stay with us on TVP World. Goodbye.